Hello, friends. Welcome to The Real Side Stories. Friends, look at this man. His name is Richard Lee, one of the most dangerous prisoners in the world. Richard has escaped from jail 3 times and tricked the police many times. A book has also been written on his story titled The Man Who Mailed Himself Out of Jail. Richard Lee's story will leave you amazed. Richard was born in 1958 in the USA. No one knows about his childhood, but his real story begins in 1987 when Richard was 29 years old. By then, this man had already stepped into the world of crime. Stealing, robbing, and looting people had become a common practice for him. But then, this man also became a murderer. Friends, it was the night of November 17th, 1987, when Richard was robbing a house in the city of Minot, USA. 2 men entered the house and tried to stop Richard. In response, Richard shot them. One of the men, named Jerry, died on the spot. After committing the murder, Richard fled the scene. For the next 3 months, the police searched for him and eventually arrested him. Richard was held at Minot Municipal Police Station. But friends, just a few hours later, Richard escaped from there. How he escaped is truly shocking. When Richard was caught, he was handcuffed and seated in a chair. He was left alone in a room. However, Richard had a strange plan. He had a lip balm that the police did not confiscate during the search. Using this lip balm, he managed to slide his hands out of the handcuffs. The handcuffs were already somewhat loose. Nevertheless, it was nighttime, and the police didn't suspect that Richard could do something like this. Richard freed himself from the handcuffs, climbed out of a window, and disappeared into the darkness of the night. Meanwhile, the police were looking for him and soon captured him again. He was hiding on the roof of a building. The police were standing below that building. Richard tried to escape by jumping onto a tree, but he fell from the tree to the ground. He injured his back severely and the police arrested him. He was then transferred to a hospital. After this, Richard was sent to Ward County Jail in the same city. Ward County Jail had strict surveillance of inmates, but Richard was planning his escape again. Later, the police presented Richard in court, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. However, 5 years later, Richard escaped from jail once more. It was October 9th, 1992, when the police discovered that Richard, along with 2 other prisoners, had escaped from jail. Richard broke out through the jail's ventilation system. One of the 3 prisoners was caught, but Richard evaded the police. Friends, after escaping from jail, Richard grew his hair long and dyed it so the police could not recognize him. He began living in different parts of the USA, but he still did not stop committing crimes. Now, he started stealing cars. For the next 10 months, he stole many cars, but eventually, the police caught him again. This time, when Richard was brought to jail, the police were both angry and embarrassed. Richard was a dangerous criminal who had committed murder and escaped from jail twice. Therefore, the police took strict measures to imprison him this time. Richard was sent to Minnesota's correctional facility, where escaping was impossible. Richard tried many times, but remained locked up for several years. Friends, Richard then went on a hunger strike. He wanted to be transferred to another jail. He also filed a petition in court to be imprisoned near his parents' home so they could visit him. Based on this plea, the police transferred him to a small-town jail in Pollock, where Richard's parents also lived. This was in 2006. It had been 14 years since Richard last escaped from jail, but now he was planning his 3rd escape. Richard worked in this jail repairing old mail bags. After working for several months, Richard made a plan to escape. He built a long box himself and hid inside it, placing the repaired mail bags on top. The jail staff unknowingly took the mail bags out of the prison, unaware that Richard was hiding beneath them. This way, Richard escaped from jail. It is said that some inmates helped him because such a task would have been impossible alone. However, friends, something even more surprising happened. For a few hours, Richard roamed freely while the police searched for him. Eventually, a police officer spotted Richard and stopped him. This video you're seeing is from the camera mounted on that police officer's car. The officer didn't recognize Richard by appearance, but only knew that a prisoner had escaped from jail. The officer asked Richard his name, and Richard lied, saying, "My name is Robert Johns." Richard was so clever that he kept the officer engaged in conversation, explaining that he was jogging and had come from another city. He claimed to be working for a company on a project in the area. The officer, suspicious, asked for his name again. This time, Richard said, "Jamie Johns." Richard was so confident that the officer didn't doubt him. He even called the jail to confirm, but the description the jail gave didn't fully match Richard's appearance. The officer let Richard go. This video became extremely famous, showing how Richard once again escaped from the police's grasp. He was now listed among the 15 most wanted prisoners in the United States. After this, Richard fled to Canada, but didn't stop committing crimes there. On April 28, 2006, Richard was spotted in a stolen car in a coastal area of Canada. The Canadian police identified the car as stolen and asked Richard to step out. As soon as Richard got out of the car, he suddenly ran into the dense forest and disappeared. Once again, he managed to escape the police. Later, the Canadian police found out that the man was the dangerous Richard Lee. Sometime later, Richard returned to the USA and lived there for several months before going back to Canada. This time, he planned to buy land and start a new life. He even had fake IDs and driving licenses. Richard began living a seemingly ordinary life, engaging in mountain biking and appearing as a regular person. Meanwhile, crime programs on TV continued to feature his story. His name and face became known across America, but Richard always managed to stay ahead of the authorities. To earn money, he continued stealing cars and remained on the most wanted prisoners list in America. Finally, on October 24, 2007, Richard was arrested again. He was found in a stolen van in the Canadian province of New Brunswick. A police officer became suspicious of the van and checked its details. Upon discovering it was stolen, the officer acted quickly, leading to Richard's arrest. The officer received an award for his vigilance. Richard himself admitted that his arrest was due to sheer bad luck, claiming he would never have been caught otherwise. Later, Richard was extradited to the USA, where he was imprisoned under extremely high security. Today, this dangerous criminal is locked in a facility from which escape is considered impossible. A book titled "The Man Who Mailed Himself Out of Jail" has been written about this man's extraordinary life.